The lesson that we learned from the KillDozer video is that everyone has a breaking point. And when you damage a man's livelihood beyond the point of repair, well, that can push him past his breaking point. So when a man is quite poor and he's struggling financially, and then he does a lot of work for you, and you promise to not just pay him, but also give him a Christmas bonus on top of that to help him through the most expensive time of the year, and then you don't give him either, well, we all know where this is going. John Manley, better known as the Mini KillDozer. But before we get into the mad lad, it is in fact your boy Rachel Legends! The hottest game on the Play Store with almost a perfect score and well over 400 champions for you to collect with a challenging story mode and my favourite thing ever, a PvP arena that lets you slap people around. Right now I'm currently farming several of the dungeons to farm potions to use in the tavern to upgrade my existing team by ascending them and making them stronger. It's important to remember to do this if you want to beat some of the harder levels. And this month, Raid are releasing their biggest ever update, the Doom Tower. 120 floors of hard challenges, harder bosses, and even secret challenge rooms. They are also releasing 14 new champions and are even hosting festive events and tournaments for the Christmas season. So click my link down below to download Raid Shadow Legends, and if you are a new player, you will get 50,000 silver, 50 gems, an energy refill, a clan boss key, 5 mystery shards, a 1-day XP booster, and a free champion, Shaman, who is really good for new players. All of these rewards are only available to new players and only for the next 30 days, and you can find these rewards here in your inbox. John Manley was born in Netherton, Merseyside, around 36 years ago, and not much is actually known about his early life, but according to a family member, he had a traumatic childhood, abusive parents, and generally a very rough life. He even had 7 convictions under his belt for criminal damage and a history of violent and impulsive behaviour. Because what good story doesn't have an element of foreshadowing? John only worked sporadically throughout his life, but he eventually managed to find work as a labourer for MF Construction, who were contracted by a company called Triton Construction to help build a new travel lodge at the Edge Lane Innovation Park in Liverpool. John worked on the site for 3 months and was owed £600 for his labour. John really needed this money, as he was sleeping on a family member's couch at the time and he couldn't even claim benefits because he had no fixed address. His financial situation was so bad that his 2 young kids couldn't even stay with him because he couldn't afford food or electricity. He didn't even have his own bank account because he didn't have the ID necessary to open one, so his wages had to be paid into a family member's account. As you would expect, this payday was basically John's lifeline, a step on the path to prosperity. This money would go a very long way to solving John's troubles and saving Christmas. But unfortunately, the company never paid him. Despite the fact that MF Construction themselves had received payment for the work they did on the building, 7 of their workers, including John, weren't paid at all. Allegedly, this was due to a glitch in the system, with one of the workers being owed as much as £1,100, with some of the other workers being owed even more. This was obviously terrible news for John, and his hardship was made even worse by the fact that he had been unsuccessful and seeking out mental health treatment for weeks. Mental health services in the area were heavily strained, and John would be on the phone to the GP at 8 a.m. every morning, but he always ended up too far back in the queue to get an appointment. He even tried to see a psychiatrist in Crosby, but the waiting list was too long there as well. No matter how hard he tried, John just couldn't catch a break. On the 19th of January, John was sick of being paid like a socialist, so he went to see the site manager, Peter Robinson. And John threatened to barricade himself inside a hut if he wasn't paid. But to his credit, the manager, Peter Robinson, did promise to try and get the problem sorted. 2 days later, on the 21st of January, the hotel was due to be completed, but the issue still had not been resolved. John went to see the site manager again at about 1 p.m, and John threatened to damage the building if he wasn't paid. Thinking that he wouldn't actually do it, the site manager made John a cup of tea and bought him a sandwich. What a nice guy, you know. It's just a shame that this meal deal was worth £597 less than what John needed. John waited for his boss to arrive with the money that he so desperately needed. And he waited and waited and waited. He kept texting and trying to call his boss, but he got no answers. John's patience was really starting to run out. And it was at this point that I imagine that the spirit of our boy, Marvin Heemeyer, smiled upon him and said, "You know what must be done," as a bright ray of sunshine descended from the heavens onto an unattended digger at the construction site. Eventually, John had had enough. He'd waited for his money for too long, and he was sick of being ignored by his boss. The strain of breaking his back to build the hotel, his severe financial stress, his mental health, and the general hardship and misery of the last few months was just too much for him to bear. And finally, the facade began to crumble. Literally. Cue the music. John's rampage lasted for about 20 to 30 minutes and caused £443,000 worth of damage to the building. The digger had completely smashed all of the windows, torn down parts of the ceiling, and completely obliterated the front desk. You may have noticed some of John's fellow workers jumping onto the digger and trying to stop the rampage in that footage, but John had locked himself inside, so they couldn't really do anything. 2 workers eventually managed to stop the destruction by disconnecting the digger's fuel line in the back, but one of the workers was blinded after being sprayed in the face by diesel. Luckily, an ambulance was called and his blindness was only temporary. But big props to those guys for actually having the balls to do something, because apparently the site manager was seen running around like a headless chicken, and most of the other workers were either filming the incident on their phones or they were just watching with a mix of shock and confusion. But just in case his reasons for destroying the hotel weren't obvious enough to everyone present, John was kind enough to clear up any ambiguity.
600 fucking quid! All you have to do is pay me for fucking 600 quid! 600 fucking quid!
With his tool of destruction disabled, John jumped out of the digger and fled, climbing over a 10-foot wire fence to escape. But because he was taking his frustration out on a building instead of on Twitter, the cops didn't arrive until after he had fled. Luckily, there was no structural damage done to the building, so repairing the damage wasn't difficult, but it did delay the opening of the hotel by 6 weeks. John managed to check himself into a mental hospital after this, but it wasn't long before he swapped the straitjacket for some prison scrubs, as he was arrested just after being discharged on the 14th of February, and he was charged with criminal damage and recklessly endangering life. Leading up to the trial in September, John denied the reckless endangerment charge, but it didn't take long for him to realise and admit that he did put people's lives in danger. He pleaded guilty to the charges on the first day of his trial, though he pleaded not guilty to a charge for dangerous driving. And on the 26th of February of this year, John was sentenced to 5 years and 4 months in prison, and he was also given a 4-year and 1 month ban from driving. I mean, he's going to be in jail the entire time, so what was the point in that? John's sentence ended up being quite controversial because a lot of people thought it was too harsh and they felt like an example was being made of him. To a lot of people, this was just yet another case of a working class guy getting absolutely beaten down and trodden upon for retaliating against the forces that screwed him over. And many comparisons were made between John Manley and the plight of Marvin Heemeyer. Some of John's own fellow workers came out in support of him, with one of them even saying, "I stand by what my colleague did. We have been getting walked on for months, and he done something about it." But it's important to note that the key point in the sentencing was the reckless endangerment, especially since it was a malicious act of revenge and not everyone got away from the incident unscathed. Regardless of John's intentions, he kinda screwed over his fellow workers by trashing months worth of their work, and he also left the hotel staff unemployed for an extra 6 weeks. None of this means that I don't sympathise with John. I understand why he did what he did, but I definitely do not agree with what he did. Yes, he did go too far and he actually hurt the wrong people with his rampage, but John did say himself that he wouldn't have done any of this at all if he had just been given an explanation for why he wasn't getting paid. But if this really was just a glitch in the system, then why wasn't John's boss answering any of his calls? But there is a silver lining to all of this. John finally got the mental health treatment that he desperately needed in the end, and all he had to do was destroy an entire hotel to get it. Isn't the NHS great? In the end, a GoFundMe had to be set up to raise money so that all the other workers could be paid their unpaid wages. And in the end, the GoFundMe ended up raising £2,700. Imagine being that bad of a company. How can you be that bad? Being that bad of a company that other people have to crowdfund to pay your workers' wages. That's pathetic. Here is how it works. If someone provides you with a product, pay them. If someone provides you with a service, pay them. If someone provides you with months of their manual labour, pay them. If I provide you with any service, give me a big kiss. Ultimately, the story of the mini KillDozer is less of an epic revenge tale than its predecessor and much more a tragic one about a man that fell through the cracks one too many times. And it's also a cautionary tale. None of this would have happened if mental health services weren't so strained and if workers and unions had more power to settle pay disputes in a civil manner. And with this in mind, I just have a few words of advice for all of our corporate overlords, terrible bosses, and the powers that be. Stop pissing off people with access to construction equipment. Stop it. Let's not turn this into a trilogy.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube. Everybody just